And I know Roseanne Butterfield, our office administrator, is also going to be joining us. And we may have some of our board participating as well, but I don't see a lot of pictures right now, so we'll see. But thank you.
Great. So we probably many of us have gotten really comfortable with Zoom, and we've just switched it up for you today. We're using our GoToMeeting account, I believe, because it gives us a little bit bigger capacity to serve more folks on the program this morning. So with that, all those introductions, and again, if you have not introduced yourself in the chat, please do. I'm really enjoying seeing everybody is here this morning, and I bet others are as well. So with that, why don't we proceed with our program? Greer, you can take us to our next slide. So as I mentioned, we've been at it about 2 years here in New Jersey, but we also have, as you know, a national counterpart to what we're doing at the state level, and that is a federally designated commission, which is known now as America 250. And Janice and I are going to give you just a little bit of an update on what they have been up to. They have, over the last few months, been conducting some listening sessions. There was one with educators, and there also was one with state representatives. So they have been out there providing opportunities for to get feedback from the field and from different constituencies around the country. And Janice, you were going to tell us about one particular listening session that New Jersey was represented in.
Yes, there was a listening session of tourism experts from states around the country, and Jeff Vassar, who's the Executive Director of Travel and Tourism here in New Jersey, was on that particular panel. And it was great that he talked about the work that we're doing here in New Jersey on the 250th, mentioned Crossroads, mentioned the site assessment, mentioned an app that we're working on moving forward. So we were really happy about that. And we were also happy that Pennsylvania was there as well. And the woman from Pennsylvania talked about how it's important for states to work together. And he said, yes, I invite you right now to come across the river. And she accepted. So that was, I think, a nice opportunity to highlight the work that's going on in the state.
Yes, thank you so much. So that's it. Yeah, I think at the national level, obviously they've been tremendously impacted by COVID-19, as have we at the state level, but they have been moving forward with these efforts to gather more feedback as they formulate their plans. And next slide, there we go. So now we can give you some updates on what's been going on at the state level. And trust me, we have been hard at work even during this pandemic over the last 7 months. So we want to share with you some of the recent developments in our work in preparing for 2026 and beyond. First of all, we can start with some good news, very good news indeed, which is that the FY 2021 New Jersey state budget does include $500,000 in funding for Revolution NJ. So we're deeply grateful to the legislature and the governor for that support, and we are hard at work at putting it to good use. And of course, we hope you're excited about that too, that we are going to be able to carry on our work in this coming year. And we appreciate the support from all of you as well. So Janice, would you take us through those next two bullets?
Sure. So obviously, you know, as many of you know, we completed the site assessment, and in the site assessment, there were some recommendations about things that need to be done to have us be visitor ready. One of the things that was in there, obviously, is the need for some training and some other opportunities. And so we've been applying for grants for heritage education conversation centers with train the trainers that might allow us to provide resources to a lot of sites throughout the state through a pilot project. We're also applying for several grants for an app that we've talked about, which is the idea that after COVID-19, a lot of people are taking vacations closer to home, regionally, and on the road. So we are hopeful. We have a number of grant requests out there and continuing to look for some other opportunities to generate some funds that way. We also, obviously, part of what we've been talking about, the 250th work, has been setting up a campaign council. And the campaign council is the primary fundraising group for a lot of these needs that will occur, not everything, obviously, for the 250th, but identifying resources. And some of that has been a little bit delayed, obviously, due to COVID-19 and also due to the fact that last year we didn't get that full $500,000 funding for this work. We're very excited about moving that forward for the future. So look for more information about the progress that we're doing with the campaign council.
Great. All right. So regular attendees of these meetings will recollect that we did undertake a survey of K-12 social studies education in New Jersey last year, and I see Hank Bitton is with us this morning. Hank was one of our experts who helped us as we put together that survey. So yeah, as it is often with best laid plans, circumstances intervene. So we launched that survey in January with a plan to continue to gather responses throughout the spring, and I don't need to tell you what happened. So we did have to make some changes to the strategy on the survey itself. So what we did do was shift in the spring. We continued to gather as many responses as we possibly could from university schools who, as we all know, were totally focused on dealing with shifting to digital learning as the pandemic progressed. And what we did was our team shifted the focus from being a comprehensive building by building survey to a sample-based survey. And they brought in some additional experts to analyze the responses we got, to make sure that there was a good representative sample in the responses we collected. So that was the major shift that we did have to make in that particular project due to COVID. And actually this afternoon, I'm going to have the first opportunity to begin to hear about the analysis of that sample. So I'm excited myself to get a first look later today. And we will, as we move forward, we'll be beginning to share that information with all of you too, and more, and others. And it's going to be a tremendous aid to us as we think about what exactly we want to undertake in this effort to strengthen and enhance the teaching of social studies and history in New Jersey. So please stay tuned for more results. And by all means, if you have some questions about that and you want to pop those in the chat, we'll do our very best to answer them at the end of the session. Okay, so in addition to those projects that we've already highlighted, and I don't think we even mentioned, of course, the site assessment project that we did complete earlier this year. We also have been engaged in long-range planning for this overall initiative. So we did want to share with you a little bit of how that process went. We began by bringing together the two leadership bodies for the Historical Commission and Crossroads. And they gathered in June of 2019, which I don't know what you all think, but seems like a very long time ago at the moment. But we did start then and began a process of visioning and setting goals for this overall initiative. And when we had come up out of that initial process, we came up with some draft goals. And over the course of the fall of 2019, leading into spring and even late spring of 2020, we conducted a series of 7 listening sessions. And in fact, some of you here today, I think, participated in some of those listening sessions. And we tried very hard to reach out to really diverse groups of New Jerseyans to get their feedback. That was an enlightening and really transformative experience, to really go out there and listen to what our fellow citizens what they are interested in, what they feel the mandates are for this anniversary planning. And we then took all of that feedback and used that to influence an updated version of the vision for this initiative and the goals. Now, I want to emphasize that we're not done listening. We intend to keep listening all the way through. So I hope you will see and perhaps participate, or perhaps encourage others to participate in future listening sessions that we are planning, because our goal is to really engage the whole state in this anniversary. And so we want to really hear about what the needs and the interests and the real calls to action are around this initiative. So where are we now? We have a couple of next steps that we're undertaking. Are the 2 boards, the board of the Crossroads and the Historical Commission, are reviewing this revised strategic framework for our initiative. And we do plan to finalize that, and then we'll be sharing it with all of you next month. So look forward to seeing that plan coming your way very, very shortly. All right, and on to our next slide. All right, now part of our planning too involves the governance structure for Revolution NJ. And we're very excited that we do have a roster for our honorary board, and we are in the process of issuing invitations to the folks who are going to serve in that capacity. And there you'll see some very familiar names from our state, those who've been leaders both in the past and then, of course, that still are. We also have comprised an advisory council for Revolution NJ. And I'd like to ask Madeline Rosenberg to tell you a little bit more about that. She's been working very hard on that. And we're really excited to see that group coalesce and begin their work. So Madeline, would you like to give us a little bit more detail?
Sure, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. So just briefly, because I know in previous quarterly meetings, we've also mentioned the Advisory Council, a reminder that this body is made up of practitioners from across the state representing diverse perspectives and disciplines to help guide the programmatic planning for Revolution NJ official programs, events, and activities. So things that come out of the initiative directly. And they will be working closely with our leadership, and our working groups and our partners and our project team to help make this as collaborative and meaningful for New Jerseyans as possible. So this body, which is co-chaired by Linda Caldwell-Epps and Kristen O'Brezil-Kulfin, had its first meeting in July, and they will be meeting this month to kickstart the interpretive planning process. They have a draft interpretive framework right now that they are reviewing, and the interpretive framework is a document that helps outline the key questions and themes and narrative approaches that will help shape our programmatic planning, but it will also be available to everyone in the state, anyone who wants to use it for their own thinking. They don't have to. And it's meant to be a tool that anyone who wants to can use. So they're going to look at that, give us feedback, and then it'll continue through our review process before we release it, with a hope of doing so in December of 2020 or by the end of the year. That is our goal. Obviously, with COVID, you never quite know what's going to happen. And I did just want to mention, building off Sarah's discussion of the long-range planning process, that process is producing a strategic framework, another foundational document for this initiative that will solidify the mission statement, as she said, and goals. And that strategic framework is something that's been really instrumental in our interpretive planning, as has all the feedback we've been getting from all of you, whether it's in the Q&A, in listening sessions, in the survey link we've sent out on multiple occasions, in meeting with scholar experts earlier this year, and so forth. So we're really downloading all this tremendous guidance and trying to create a document and a framework that will be responsive and useful to everyone. And I did just want to mention that when we do finalize the interpretive framework and share it, we will be offering opportunities to talk about it and answer any questions and give advice if wanted. So at our next quarterly meeting, it's not confirmed, but we're hoping that our 2 advisory council co-chairs will be able to join us to answer any preliminary questions, but it will not be the only opportunity to ask questions, to share thoughts, and so forth. And so I think that's everything on the governance structure, and I'm happy to move to the next slide, Greer, if you're ready. Another quick update that I think Sarah was hoping I could share was on a public history and arts planning project that our Revolution NJ project team has had underway. This is primarily a partnership between the Historical Commission and the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, another state agency. We've been working with the Public Art and History Studio Monument Lab, which specializes in projects that ask and explore ideas about commemoration and memory. So many of you may be aware of the conversations that are happening at the local, regional, national, international level about monuments and memorials and collective memory and public space. And the idea is that we would like to explore the notion of doing something larger scale, multi-location in New Jersey for the 250th anniversary. But before embarking on a large-scale process in order to help determine what would be effective and serve our diverse communities, we've started this interim, smaller-scale planning project looking, as I said, about commemoration and memory in relation to the American Revolution in New Jersey. This planning project involves 9 New Jersey-based artists from North, South, and Central, and artists and historians and other practitioners. And they're working on case studies this fall to help shape our thinking about a potential larger project. So their case studies will be completed this October, November, and out of that we'll get a report with sort of a proposed concept for what this larger project could look like. So we don't know anything beyond that right now, but we're really hopeful that we can do something that's exciting and would serve communities throughout the state and help engage with these really, really important questions of how we think about the past and the stories we tell in our public spaces. So we're excited about that, and we'll share more when we know more.
Okay, and this is back to me. Crossroads, as many of you know, conducts a number of workshops for heritage partners and others that are interested, and normally they're in person. Obviously, due to COVID-19, we did our last workshop on Zoom, and it was held in July. And what was interesting about it is it's something that, again, came out of the site assessment recommendations. Cheryl Hargrove, who was one of the consultants working on that and a leading heritage tourism expert, spoke about the need to have better customer service and figure out how to do that and figure out how to get people to come to sites and stay longer when they're there. So we put together this workshop, and Cheryl was one of the speakers, along with Jeff Vassar from Travel and Tourism, who again spoke about the importance of heritage tourism, and that, you know, once again, that New Jersey is not just the shore, although the shore is very important. And Mark Nunestead, we featured one of our partners from Middlesex County, who was talking about East Jersey Old Town and how they had a dramatic increase in visitation prior to COVID, after they shifted away from just tours and lectures to interpretive focus, you know, prior to COVID. So so I think that this was, I think, very well received, gave a lot of really important information, and it's available on our website if you are interested in seeing it. And we're working, we'll let you know about a future workshop that we're putting together on virtual and social media that we hope to have soon for you. I'd like to, at this point, go to the next slide. Okay, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Algernon Ward is a member of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, which portrays the contributions of Black soldiers during the American Revolution. Algernon is a lifelong resident of Trenton and is a regular presenter at the Old Barracks events, focusing on the Revolution and other wars in American history. We're honored to have Algernon with us today to share an overview of Black soldiers in the Revolution on both the American and British sides. Algernon.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name's Algernon Ward, and thank you for having me today. It's my pleasure to address your group on the contribution of African Americans to the history of our country. Hopefully, what you'll walk away with at the end of my presentation is an idea of what the dynamic was among African Americans on both sides during the Revolution. And I've entitled my talk, Freedom First, because that was the central issue. Regardless of what side you served on, the idea was we'd have to be free. And the real argument was how to get there. And I'll do my best to step through some of the thinking that I've been able to discover regarding that particular topic, which was the central topic. Now, this one is more of an overview of what was going on in the Revolutionary Army during the period, but I also have another talk that focuses more on what was life in New Jersey for African Americans during that period. And perhaps sometime in the future, we'll get to discuss that. It's a bit more granular, a bit more local focus than my overall talk now. But you'll notice that picture there that you're seeing, face might be familiar. So we'll get started. Next slide, please. Of course, most of you are familiar, if not all, with Crispus Attucks as one of the original martyrs of the Revolution. A great deal was made of his sacrifice of his life during what's called the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Massacre. And he was indeed one of the first people who were killed there. But it might help to understand a little bit about him so that it places him in context. He was what was referred to at the time as a mulatto. His mother was an Indian, a Native American of either Nangusset or Nantucket or Nantic Indian, one of those local tribes, an African American man, and this was their son, Crispus. Now, Crispus was the kind of guy who tried to make a living as best he could under the circumstances. In fact, he was a kind of a character in that there was a early mention of him in the newspaper having run away from his master and gone to sea. And the newspaper article kind of admonished anyone from hiring on their ships, but they readily ignored that, and he became a seaman. Did some whaling. His other specialty was rope making, and this becomes important later as one of the precipitating factors about the friction between Americans and British soldiers. Crispus at one point had been dragooned into the British Navy and had to serve about 18 months on a ship. They were badly treated aboard his ship. The food was very poor. And finally, when he was brought ashore, he was given a few coins, and that incident made him he didn't like the British very much after that. And that was compounded by the fact that one of the things that seamen did when they were ashore, would make ropes and tar ships working in the shipyard. But British soldiers kind of felt that it was their right to push the Americans aside for those jobs. And of course, this created friction with Crispus and other seamen of the town when British soldiers took their jobs and chased them out of the dockyards with bayonets. And this didn't go down very well with the locals. And finally it came to a head in a bar one night where Crispus and others encountered one of the soldiers who had taken their jobs. And of course, the friction broke out, arguments started, crowd gathered, the church bell rang, the soldiers came out, Crispus is there with the group, someone threw snowballs, someone set a piece of ice, hit a soldier, the guns fired, and of course, this is when they all died in that shooting. Next slide, please. The interesting thing about the whole entire incident was that John Adams, who actually defended the British soldiers, described the group as a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes, mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish jacktars. That's the future president describing his fellow Americans and defending the British for shooting them. But it clearly points out that there was Black participation from the earliest moments of the revolution, beginning with the Boston Massacre. Now, another interesting feature of this is that during 1858, some 2 years before the Civil War, abolitionists in Boston actually erected a statue, a monument to Crispus Attucks, being one of the first to shed his blood for the American Revolution. And this became interesting in that it was opposed by the Boston Historical Society. They saw him as a villain rather than a victim, but with all the discussion about monuments, this is just another penny in the pond in discussing the whole issue of what monuments are appropriate. Next slide, please. I'd also like to point out that African Americans had always had freedom as the object of much of what they did. And following the Boston Massacre, as things spiraled towards war and finally broke out, African Americans were in the thick of it from the very beginning. There were Blacks at Lexington and Concord. Pomp Blackman and Prince Estabrook were Minutemen, and they also took part in the battle where the shot was heard around the world. In fact, Prince Estabrook was actually wounded at Lexington Green. Those defending the North Bridge was Peter Salem of Framingham and Samuel Craft of Newton, Caesar Ferret and his son John, and Pompey of Braintree. Pomp Blackman and Prince of Brookline also were at Concord, Cambridge Moore and Caesar Prescott, and Caesar Baston. And Caesar Baston was actually killed at Breeds Hill, or what we know as Bunker Hill. So the point I'm making is that from the earliest clashes with the British, African Americans were involved in the American Revolution. In fact, Cuff Cartwright had done his own ride, much like Paul Revere, to warn the approach of the British, and actually participated with David Lawson, who actually captured some of the British supply wagons. Next slide, please. Next one. Next slide. And what's interesting about this photograph, this is the death of the colonel at Battle of Bunker Hill, and it said that it was Peter Salem himself who shot Colonel Pitcairn at Bunker Hill. And in fact, a U.S. stamp was made of this particular painting that was issued several years ago. But the overall painting depicts the death of Lord Pitcairn at the hands of Peter Salem at Bunker Hill. So again, I'm just pointing out that African Americans were in the thick of things from the first moments of the revolution. And by the way, on both sides. Next slide, please. Now, this is a famous depiction of British African American serving with the British, but as it turns out, it was misused. This was actually a battle near England. It was not Bunker Hill. Often it's seen there, but that was a later depiction that really didn't belong in that. But in European culture, African were often kept in upper royal places as kind of status symbol. If you had a black slave or a black servant, it showed you could afford some of the higher, more exotic luxuries in life. So having blacks servants was a real status symbol. And of course, higher ranking officers had them with them as well in the British Army. And with a far-flung empire, it's not unusual for blacks to wind up serving with the crown forces. Next slide, please. Now, this is a depiction of a soldier from the 4th Connecticut Regiment. Now, people often think that there was only 1 or 2 regiments of containing large number of African Americans, but that's not the case. This is a point where the American Army was integrated in almost every one of the regiments. There was someone of African descent in many of the companies and regiments, militias, particularly in the North. In the South, not as much, but in the North, certainly. And this is the 4th Continental Regiment that had an entire company, 2nd Company, had 48 black privates and NCOs, and they served until 1782. And then they were moved to the Connecticut Regiment. Alexander Hamilton actually commanded them down in Yorktown at the final battle. And Samuel Middleton, which is a name that I just became familiar with, he is the only known African-American commissioned officer in the Revolutionary Army. In fact, his company was called the Bucks of America. John Hancock came to visit him and presented him with a flag for the Bucks of America that had both Hancock and his initials on it, and was donated. It's still on display in the Massachusetts Historic Society on the next slide. His Excellency General George Washington. George Washington, being a Virginia slaveholder, had a rather low opinion of the military capabilities of African Americans, like most people of his time. So after the initial battles of the Revolution, when George Washington was given command of the Continental forces, his orders when he got to camp in July 1775 said, "No deserter from the ministerial army, nor any stroller, Negro, or vagabond will be recruited. The Continental Army was to be a white army." That was his attitude. Peter Salem's response to that was, "So here you come now talking about a white army. We've already been in battle, Bunker Hill, conquered. What do you want us to do, dig up our dead? They've already paid the price in blood for serving in the army. Here comes this Southern slave owner telling us that we can't serve." And being the commander, he forbid recruiters from putting any more blacks into the army because he felt the quality would suffer. And so after a lot of consternation and reconsideration, he decided, well, if you're already in the army, we'll let you stay, but we won't recruit anymore. That's only the attitude of someone who feels that they have ample soldiers available and that he doesn't need these lower quality Negroes in the army. Next slide, please. And then Lord Dunsmore, the British made a great point of pointing out all these Americans talking about freedom and liberty while they hold slaves. George Washington himself has Harry Lee riding alongside of him as his body servant. And that all this talk about freedom and equality of man, and here you are holding slaves. So you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You're a bunch of hypocrites. In fact, the Crown has declared that anyone who would take the king's shilling will be given a plot of land, king's shilling, and given immediate emancipation. Wow. Now, if you're an African American, what side would you choose? Would you stay with these Americans who have this weak army of malcontents who are slaveholders, or would you go with the government that's the largest army in the world, the Navy, and you'll get immediate freedom? So if you were a black person, what side would you choose? Immediate freedom, or these Americans who talk about freedom but act a different way? American hypocrisy. Anybody? No. Well, I can tell you, the Americans, the African Americans at that time, the idea of immediate freedom was highly attractive. And they went over to the British in twice the numbers that they went over and served with the colonial army. And I have to tell you, given that choice, it would be a hard one to stick with these Americans who, again, are talking out of both sides of their mouths about freedom, but never really practicing it. The amazing part was that about 5,000 Americans, 5,000 to 6,000 African Americans joined the colonial army. So these are people who actually believed in the idea of the American dream, and we could term them as true patriots. But Washington, being a tactical person that he was, began to understand some things. First, his army had been defeated. There was high desertion, there was disease, and he had lost every battle up until that point. His army began to dwindle. And with the advent of Lord Dunsmore's proclamation, he realized this was going to put enormous stress on the Southern economy and infuse the British Army with a whole new population of people. So he began to rethink his whole position on blacks in the Army. Next slide, please. So as particularly this happened, well, one of the regiments that was raised was called the Ethiopian Regiment in Virginia. They had they painted on their shirts, "Freedom for Slaves." Recruiting was quite successful in Virginia, and they gave the militia there fit and challenged them and fought them at a place called North Bridge. But General Washington himself realized, particularly when he was at Valley Forge and the privations there, and the dwindling of his army, starvation, all the rest, he had to stop being so choosy. And so he actually changed his mind. Next slide. During 1778, that as numbers of free Negroes are desirous of enlisting, he gives leave to the recruiting officers to attain anybody who'd like to join. And he promised to lay it before Congress, who he didn't doubt would approve it. This is by 1775. So he's changed his mind now. Yeah, you can join the Army. And at first he said it was only going to be freemen, but he realized that in the militia, you could send what's called a substitute. If you owned a slave, he could serve in your stead, and that helps fill the quota for that militia and that state. So he began to kind of turn a blind eye to the fact that slaves were being sent as substitutes, and that actually the state of Rhode Island legislature had already passed a bill that allowed for the recruitment of African Americans and Native Americans into their militia, because they were having difficulty in recruiting enough men for their regiment. Next slide, please. And here we have the only known depiction of a soldier of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. They initially had about 250 Negroes in their first company and about 50 in their second company. And this is the uniform, which is a cast-off French uniform, by the way, donated by the French. And this is how they appeared. Vergès did a painting of this, and this is the only known contemporaneous depiction of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. We're still having great arguments over whether that's a cape on his shoulder or a winter shirt, but we're working on it. In fact, I'm gonna give you a little hint. This summer I worked with Don Troiani, the military artist, and we posed as models for his new painting of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment to be the first Black Revolutionary War regiment depicted on the cover of Military History magazine, and to be hanging in the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, the original. So we're flattered to have been chosen for that role, and depicting that soldier that you see in front of you from the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. Next slide, please. This is the flag of the original flag of the Bucks of America under Samuel Middleton, who was the only known commissioned Black officer in the Continental Army. This flag yet survives in the Massachusetts Museum. Next slide, please. This picture here is, well, you might recognize the guy in the middle. The one standing next to him is Captain Orne. These are the Marbleheaders. We did the 250 crossing of the Delaware. And these men were actually, these are men from Marblehead, Massachusetts, many of them descendants of the original Marbleheaders, Colonel Glover's Marbleheaders. The man I'm standing next to is Captain Orne. And sure enough, his ancestor was with Washington as he crossed the Delaware. So when we did this reenactment, it was eerily, I don't know what to call it. I was looking at the ghosts of the past, watching Glover's real Marbleheaders and crossing the Delaware with them was a kind of a really surreal moment. It was a great thing. But Glover's Marbleheaders had, in fact, between 14 and 20 blacks. In the 14th Continental, one named Black Joe Brown, that I often portray, was there, along with Colonel Glover, from before the war till after it. So there were blacks in many of the regiments, Marbleheaders being just one. Next slide, please. This is a depiction of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment after the Battle of Rhode Island. Again, this was a painting done by the French, description of what had happened at the battle. They had performed deeds of desperate valor to hold off the British, who were intent on invading Rhode Island. They had held the British Hessian attack, 2 different attacks, suffering heavy casualties, but kept them from sweeping through the entire state of Rhode Island. And the 1st Rhode Island Regiment acquitted itself well. This was one of their first times in battle, and no one knew what to expect or how they would behave, but they were determined not to embarrass themselves, and fought very well. Next slide, please. And that's an important fact because many people, including Washington, had underestimated the mettle of these black soldiers. In fact, there was an extra burden on them to prove their worth. And so they were very meticulous and committed to depicting themselves or performing as good soldiers. And they became some of his best soldiers for that reason. They would stand their ground when they had to, and they were precise in their maneuvers and pay very close attention to their job as soldiers. And they began to stick out. They became some of Washington's most reliable troops. These were people that he could count on in the thick of the battle to do what they were asked to do. This is a slide regarding blacks who had run away in New Jersey. I think this is one of Titus. I show this because Titus, the records are in the archive, New Jersey archive, and you could see this in the first person writing. But I have to also mention, if I mention Titus, I have to mention someone called Colonel Ty. Now, he wasn't actually a colonel, but he was in charge of a band of African-American loyalists who gave fits to the Perth Amboy in the area around at the shore, and had a very large bounty put on his head by the Americans. And Colonel Ty served the British with vigor in that area. He had served also been in Monmouth County doing his exercises against the Americans. In the Battle of Monmouth, the interesting thing about this is that you had the 1st Rhode Island Regiment fighting with the Colonials, and you had Colonel Ty fighting with the British. So this is one of the first times African Americans faced off against each other in battle on both sides. Colonel Ty was eventually killed, got wounded, and died of sepsis, but he was notorious throughout New Jersey for his exploits. He was actually died in an attack on Captain Huddy's fort in 1780. Next slide, please. On the Patriot side, we had Samuel Sufton. Now, Samuel Sufton was a substitute for Caspar Berger. He was sent to serve in Caspar Berger's place. The thing that you would note here is that although he served, his pay went back to Casper Berger. And he came in the army and served, and he would go back and help on the farm, and then he'd go back in the army. This proceeded from 1776 to 1781, back and forth into the army. He was at the Battle of Long Island. He was the Battle of Millstone. He survived an ambush of loyalists, Tories, and Indians in Elmira, New York. He served in West Point. And finally, at the end, when he came home, he was sold several times and finally ended up with Peter Supton. And that's the name he adopted. And he ended up living in Baskin Ridge. But he had been promised his freedom after the revolution, but unfortunately, he didn't get it. His Samuel Sutton had died. His wife inherited the ownership of Samuel. She said he was too valuable to let go. So finally, he still served their family until she actually died. And he was given to the church. And finally, by the time he was 87, he began to fight for his pension. But he actually was given a pension because they examined his military records, and sure enough, he was documented, have participated in all these revolutionary battles. And later, he was given a pension from New Jersey. We know his story because, again, this is in the New Jersey archive. Next slide, please. And another one we'd like to point out is Oliver Cromwell from Bordentown. Again, he's applying to New Jersey for his pension, and he was granted that pension. And in so doing, he had to produce evidence that he had served. And when he submitted his document, it was signed by none other than his good friend, George Washington himself, who attested to the service of Oliver Cromwell in the Second New Jersey Continental Line. He had gotten to know him. He had been at Trenton and Princeton, Brandywine, Monmouth. He actually went to Canada at one point and was there at Yorktown. So General Washington, as he was wont to do after the war, penned a glowing letter for Samuel Cromwell, and he was granted his pension. And this is one of the few signatures of Washington that we have in the New Jersey archives, and it appears on the discharge of Oliver Cromwell. Next slide, please. This is just a partial list of Black patriots from New Jersey that we can document easily. There were more, but these are the ones that you could find readily by doing a search through the state archives. Each one of these people have a fascinating story to talk about. I can't spend as much time on doing that today as I would like, but this is a partial list. Negro Prime is another one who you would find the records in the state archive. And just one more issue about Oliver Cromwell. Cyrus Bustill. Cyrus Bustill is the great-grandfather of Paul Robeson from Princeton. Next slide, please. And just a little bit more about Black loyalists. Once that was done and the African Americans realized that by joining the British, you could get immediate emancipation by invoking the image of freedom. Whoever invoked the image of liberty, I should say. And many Blacks rallied to that cry and performed with the British during the service, during the war, which earned them some consideration by the government after the war. Many of these Blacks fled from the United States up into Nova Scotia and Buxton, Ontario, which you should know was the end of the Underground Railroad. That's where you were headed if you were on the Underground Railroad. Nova Scotia or Buxton, Ontario, where blacks had formed colonies in those areas. But what do we know about Nova Scotia? Too cold for Africans. We didn't like the cold. So we petitioned the king. Everybody were playing these games on the ice with a puck and a stick, knocking it all around, and it became very popular and kind of caught on. But in the meantime, the Africans there were not pretty happy with the infertile ground and the treatment they were receiving. So they petitioned the queen to come to England, and it was granted. And 3 ships headed to England with blacks, but the captains unscrupulously made a left turn, a right turn, and sold some of them back into slavery in Jamaica. Some ships did land in England and were freed, but they were still unhappy. So from other people in Nova Scotia, they petitioned to go back to Africa. So they did actually form the country of Sierra Leone and Liberia, and began to recolonize that area. There's a whole nother story about that, whatever happened to all these black loyalists. But this is a fertile ground for research, and there's many, many more stories to share with you. I'm sorry, there's a ambulance going by, it kind of distracted me. But what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make at the end of this talk is this, that freedom is the hottest commodity or the most important feature that African Americans had to consider in their lives. And it took a prescient, a looking down the road on the part of African Americans to join the colonial cause, to become an American patriot, because they understood if they contributed now at the formation of the nation, no one could dispute their right to citizenship further on. In fact, it was evoked, that very thing was evoked by Abraham Lincoln himself at Gettysburg when he talked about forefathers fighting for freedom during the American Revolution. So that 77 years ago was the American Revolution, and that he talked about a new birth of freedom. He was talking about African Americans. And these people understood that they paid the price for American citizenship, that they may not get it themselves within their own lifetimes, but they were laying the groundwork for future generations yet unborn, to secure those liberties. So these are true American patriots. But I can't be mad at the loyalists who took the chance to be free at the first opportunity either. If you were a slave, you'd be hard put to turn down a grant of land and money and freedom from the government. All you had to do was stick with the government, which made ultimate good sense to people. So this is a very good discussion. There's a movie called The Book of Negroes, which goes into this discussion about being loyal or a patriot, and which is the best way to secure your freedom. And it's a it's the best job I've seen of people having that particular discussion. And I tell you, it rattles around inside my head what I would have done given those choices. But I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions you have. And I'll take my hat off.
Thank you so much, Algernon. And I know that some people are posing some questions in the chat, and we've asked Sue Kaufman to, pose some of those questions so that you can answer them. And I know that there are some that were posed earlier in the meeting that Sarah and her team and I can answer as well. So, and if you have additional ones you want to, pose for Algernon, please do so. And thank you again for a great presentation. We all learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. I tried to summarize as best I could. Death by PowerPoint. I just didn't want to sit there and read all that information out to you, but I hope you gained something out of it. In doing this research, I learned a mountain of stuff, and I'm still learning. There's so many stories in New Jersey and in the country that just haven't been touched upon. And I'm glad you have Linda Caldwell Epps, because she's a treasure of information involved with the Crossroads, and we're going to support your efforts to the best we can as well.
Let me add my thanks, Algernon. That was terrific. I learned so much. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I guess I should say this. I left it that George Washington had changed his mind about soldiers. In fact, he had done a complete 180 by the end of the war. He was effusive in his praise of the Rhode Island service. He needed them they saved the entire Continental Army at the Battle of Monmouth. They were the ones who manned the fence that allowed the army to withdraw from the field, and they held the ground that allowed them to do that. So they became some of his most dependable soldiers, so much so that by the time of Yorktown, they were among the soldiers that attacked Redoubt Number 9, which was the one closest, 9 and 10, which were the ones closest to the fort. And they were some of his most reliable soldiers. Even after the war, he admitted he had to rethink this whole slavery thing, because the British were right. You can't talk about freedom and liberty while you hold slaves. And he promised to free his slaves. Actually, he didn't. Upon his death, his wife, Mary Custis, was the one who held the money, and they were actually hers. But they were freed at some point, but it was after her death. So, but he did promise to free them, and he did some agonizing over the issue of slavery. So he had, based on the service of the soldiers during the war. So George Washington had evolved in his thinking about the quality of African Americans and African American soldiers. Anybody with any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for having me.
There are some comments in the chat now.
Yeah,
Sue, do you want that?
Yeah, there are a couple of additional resources that we can point out. Sue Kozel very helpfully shared a link to a document that she had published on the NJEA website that was published just a couple of weeks ago, called Black Lives in the Past and Present, New Jersey African American Resources for the American Revolution. So if you open up the chat box, you can scroll down and catch that link. And I've also grabbed that, which we can include in the follow-up document, reminder that we'll be sending out to everybody later on with the replay. I'd also like to suggest our own Revolutionary Neighbors series on revolutionarynj.org, which includes some of the folks that Algie mentioned, including Colonel Ty Prime and Oliver Cromwell, as well as a few other people of African American descent who participated in the American Revolution here in New Jersey. So we'll have that for you as well.
Kay Trimble asked about the first round of the Connecticut farms in Springfield. Yeah, they were in those battles at Connecticut Farms and at Springfield, and they suffered pretty heavy casualties in those battles. In fact, that's one of the reasons why their ranks was depleted. That and that, not Great Bridge, another bridge where they suffered heavy casualties. They were combined with the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment. They became the Rhode Island Regiment rather than the 1st or the 2nd, because they had been depleted by battles both at Connecticut Farms and at Springfield. But they had fought well, and again, this is one of the things that convinced General Washington that these were some of his more reliable troops. You asked me, am I participating in the Forgotten Victory Trail project? from Elizabeth to Springfield. I'd like to know more about it. Perhaps we will. There's a link at the American Philosophical Society on Jefferson and Lord Dunsmore's proclamation, which should be very interesting. I'm going to take a look at that when I get a minute.
Paul Larson also provided a link to a fire curtain at the Crispus Attucks Theater in Norfolk, Virginia, just as a further item on Crispus Attucks.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what that meant. There was a fire curtain at the 19th? I'm not sure what that is.
I think it's a fire protection curtain, but we can look into that to take a look.
Okay.
Sue, I think Paul has provided a link to it in the chat.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
We did have a couple of other questions that have come up through the duration of the meeting. I don't know if we want to move to those.
Well, just one about the march to Yorktown, which the first Rhode Island did march Rochambeau from Rhode Island all the way to Yorktown. They passed to Philadelphia. In fact, the picture that Don Troiani is painting is of us marching through us, like I was there, like marching through Philadelphia. And they did come through New Jersey. And someone asked me, what is my opinion of the 1619 project? From what I saw, and I have to admit that I haven't read the entire thing, but a quick perusal of it, I don't see a problem with the 1619 project. There were some conservative African Americans who criticized it, said it diminishes American history. I've never heard something so ridiculous in my life. It's simply the date when the first cargo of blacks landed in the United States, in America, and simply saying that we're studying history from that perspective. I don't see how that attacks anyone or diminishes anything about any other later period United States. It's just simply a project that documents that. But you have some people who feel that. All right, I'm gonna keep it real with y'all. I think the worst thing that happens nowadays is that we like to believe in a bubblegum wrapper version of history, and that we have often glanced over the uncomfortable or unpopular parts in order to beatify what we see as our heroes. But I think as historians and people interested in history, we have an obligation to tell the entire story. And actually, I'm here as a reenactor to tell that part of the history that's rarely, if ever, I'm sorry, there's a phone in my back. My role is to tell the story that hasn't been told. And that's largely due to the omission of African American history throughout the telling of American history. I'm not going to promote a sanitized version of history because it makes someone uncomfortable to learn the truth or all of the facts. So those who criticize the 1619 project, what would they have us do? Forget it? I don't know what the purpose is there. They can quibble with historical points along the way. That's fine. It's supposed to be historically accurate. But the notion that it shouldn't be performed, I just don't know where that comes from. Anyone else?
Thank you again, Algernon. And I think we have a couple of questions that came at the beginning of the meeting from the PowerPoint presentation. So Sue, if you could pose those.
Yes. The first one came from Tim Hart, who asks us, when are the Revolution NJ logos going to be downloadable? Can we do that now?
Sarah, do you want to address that?
Sure, I can address that, absolutely. Tim, we are going to be working through a process by which groups and activities can use that logo. We're not going to be rolling that out this fall, but we will be rolling it out in the near future.
Okay, thanks. The next question comes from Paul Soltis, saying, understanding that plans are tentative at this time, what kind of programs would Revolution NJ hold on its own as opposed to coordinating with programs offered from permanent historic sites and historical organizations?
So I can take a first stab at that, and then invite Madeline to add to it if I forget anything. Paul, I think the real answer to your question is that we are not at the point of announcing any specific programs for 2026. But that's really very much going to be the next stage of our work. We told you about the strategic framework and the interpretive framework that we're putting in place. And that's going to give us that great foundation to now then move on to actually planning specific initiatives for this anniversary. So I hope you all will stay tuned as we begin to roll out more of that information in the coming year. And rest assured that we're also going to be thinking about great ways in which all of our history groups can be involved in this, because as I think you all remember from the very beginning of this, we're looking at the revolution. Obviously, that's the anniversary that is being marked in this initiative. But we also are looking at all 250 years of the history that followed that, and the ways in which the revolution and the ideals of the revolution impacted what transpired after. So we really are looking forward to lots of opportunities for all our history groups and for all of our citizens to get involved. Madeline, do you want to add to that at all?
Sure, thank you. I mean, you're absolutely correct there. So I'll just add two quick points. The first, emphasizing that whatever is an official Revolution NJ program for our initiative is just a small part of this larger observance of this anniversary period. And so we anticipate and we encourage local organizations and perhaps even individuals who will come up with their own plans, and hopefully that can be an iterative and collaborative process, as Sarah mentioned. But in terms of official Revolution NJ programs, we're really very early on. We're really in the pre-concept phase, which brings me to my second point, which is that we really can't plan anything until this interpretive framework that I discussed earlier is solidified. We don't want to put the cart before the horse and start planning products without knowing what our guiding questions and key themes and our goals are. So that's why we're doing this deliberate process of determining those frameworks, and then we'll start to talk about concepts for official programs. So just stay tuned.
Thank you. All right, Sue, is there, I think there are a couple more, right?
It looks like we don't have any additional questions quite yet, but we are getting thanks from Washington Crossing Park Association and Ed Ehrling about unwrapping the bubble gum and helping us see the full truth. And Ellie Calcagna is saying, I believe after hearing Algernon's talk, the main question that faced this young nation was really, what is liberty, what is freedom, and how does it impact an entire new nation and all its inhabitants? And we also got a request to post Algernon's contact information. Is that okay with you, Alg?
Sure, why not? Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll do that when we post the replay for this meeting. It'll be on the Crossroads page as soon as we have the recording made ready.
Cool.
So I might just, if I may, I've got a question posed to me that I think others might be interested in the answer to. So I thought I would just answer that for everyone. The question was, do we have regular communication with America 250, or is it ad hoc? And you know, it is pretty regular communication, and it takes the form of one branch of the initiative that is focused on communication with states and territories. So America 250 actually has a staff person, his name is Sean McBurney, whose job is to keep that conversation and dialogue going with states and territories. And so we do hear regularly from him. And in fact, I think Janice and I have a meeting that he has arranged coming up in a week or two. Am I right, Janice?
That is correct.
Yeah, so there is, I think as with so many initiatives, there was a little bit of a lull following the pandemic's arrival, but I think they're kind of getting back into or into a new mode of operating, and we seem to be hearing pretty regularly from them again. So hope that answers that question.
No, and I would also say that I don't know how other people on this call feel, but you know, clearly COVID-19 did impact everybody, but I don't feel like we had a lull. I feel like we're moving at quite a quick speed to address these issues and get us well positioned for 2026 and beyond. So we really appreciate all your interest.
Yep, agreed. Okay, so if you do have any more questions, by all means, you know, type them there, and Sue, you can chime in if any more come in. But I do want to just let you know that we will continue this line of communication with all of you. So the next quarterly meeting will be Tuesday, January 14th at 11 a.m. Using the GoToMeeting platform as we did today. And in the meantime, I hope you know where to find us at Crossroads and at the New Jersey Historical Commission. Since we have just a moment or two, let me just mention a couple of other resources. Good, thank you. Greer has put up all the contact information for us there. Let me just mention, since we do have a minute left here, that I know that many of you in your organizations are working through how to manage through this current crisis created by COVID-19. And I do want to remind you that we have a number of resources available to you at the New Jersey Historical Commission website. We have a variety of links to different resources related to COVID, whether it's how to reopen your site or how to do financial planning through this crisis, et cetera. So there's a lot of information there. I encourage you to check that out. We also are in the process of planning a couple of additional workshops for later this fall, both on digital programming, because there was continuing interest in that, as well as financial planning, specifically financial planning through the crisis. So please stay tuned for those. And then finally, if you haven't heard about it, there is a brand new New Jersey Arts and Culture Relief Fund that was just recently announced, and applications are available right now and open. They are accepting applications. You can find information about that at the website of the Princeton Area Community Foundation, because they are the host for that program. So if you haven't heard about that particular opportunity, I just wanted to take the opportunity today to make sure I mentioned it. And if you have specific questions about it, you can certainly reach out to me at the email indicated there. So with that, Sue, do we have any final questions?
No, we don't.
Great. Well, then we'll return 6 minutes back to you for your day. And thank you all very, very much for joining us for the quarterly update. And we will see you again in January.